Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. It is 7:08. Ms. Secretary, would you like to take roll?
Yes, we are all here and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Next, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I ask that if you please join me in a moment of quiet reflection in remembrance of Brett Finblum, who is a 2012 Carmel High School graduate. And we'll begin with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First, we'll begin with the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
And Madam President, a quick point of privilege, if I may, members of the board. With the action this evening on our consent agenda, I'm delighted to indicate that you have approved two fine new members of the administrative staffs at two of our middle schools. It's my pleasure to ask him to stand. John Corcoran, who is our new AD at Clay. Welcome, John. And I believe, as every AD should, he's brought his own cheering section with him. And John, maybe you can introduce whoever's here with you.
Yes, this is my wife, Megan, my son, Jack, my son, William, and my son, Quinn. And yes, they're all 4 years old.
Outstanding. Welcome to the team.
Thank you.
And then, members of the board, you also took action in the consent agenda to approve the greatest member of the Carmel Middle School administrative team, Assistant Principal Josh Kendrick. Josh, welcome. And although it is not a tradition necessarily that an assistant principal brings a cheering section, Josh has. He's well equipped, and Josh, maybe you can introduce who's here with you.
My pleasure. I have with me my mother, June Kendrick, my wife, Samantha, my daughter, Addie, and my son, Nathan.
We're glad you all are part of our team. Welcome.
Now reiterate, thank you very much for coming this evening. We're very excited for you to join our team as well. Next, we'll move on to action items, and our first item is going to be presented by Dr. Thompson.
Good evening. As if you maybe had read the email this morning from Mrs. Howes and myself, you will know that this is bringing one last addition to our English Language Arts materials, and this time it is for the 4-5 challenge class, and this is approving 2 fiction books so that we can meet the requirements of Common Core and the PARC model. As you will recall from the other offerings that we brought earlier in the spring, we have rewritten the curriculum to align with Common Core and use the PARC model, which requires that students all read a core text each quarter, 2 nonfiction and 2 fiction. And so from the last adoption, we didn't have enough fiction books so that every student would be able to have one. So that's why we're bringing these 2 to you.
Thank you. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the books that are recommended?
I'll move to approve those books.
Okay, second? Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any questions?
Oh.
Sorry. I guess not. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And next on the agenda, we have Mr. McMichael.
Thank you. I've got before you a recommendation to do a refunding on 2 of our bond issues, the 2002 and also the 2003 issues. You could compare this to refinancing of your home mortgage. We have an opportunity because of the historically low interest rates to save some money on the interest that we're paying on these bonds. It's been estimated by our financial advisor that we would save a little over $667,000. And so there's really no downside to doing this unless you would believe that the market would, the interest rate would continue to decline. And we know how trying to guess that works. So I'm advising that we proceed to do this refunding because it will ultimately it'll lower the amount of interest we pay and therefore the amount of interest that our taxpayers are going to pay. Now we do have three options actually with regard to this. The first one would be to do the refinancing, take the $600,000+ and apply that to a needed a capital expenditure of some sort. And a second option would be to take the savings and reduce the bond payment by about $100,000, a little more, over the next 5 years. The third option, which is the option I'm recommending, would be to use the savings to lower the last payment in 5 years or 6 by the entire $600,000. Now, in the context of our debt payments, which are over $16 million, this is not a lot of money percentage-wise, but it's still $600,000. And it happens that our debt payments, as these bonds pay out, does increase slightly. That's very typical because when bonds are sold, there's an assumption that particularly in a community like Carmel, that the assessed value will increase over the years. That's not been the case recently with the historical recession, but nevertheless, as the assessed value would increase, then the same tax rate would raise more money. Thus, you can anticipate a little higher payment. We're not as sure of that these days as we would have been in the past, and so my thought was if we apply this or have it available to be applied to the ending payment, gives us a little financial flexibility to kind of manage that tax rate a few years from now. And while it wouldn't be a huge thing, every little bit does help. And either option, 2 or 3, will result in the community paying less dollars for these debts. Only option 1 would they'll pay the same dollars, but we would have more capital to do more capital projects. So my recommendation would be to select the third option and, of course, to proceed with the refunding.
Thank you, Roger. Can I get a motion on the table to discuss this action item, recommendation? Thank you.
Move to approve the recommendation.
A second?
I'll second.
Second. Questions? Yes, Mr. Phillips.
Yes. It's $667,000, $2/3 we're looking at here, which is compared to the total debt, a fairly insignificant figure, but still it's $2/3 looking at our agenda for later on this evening, I see that we'll be discussing the strategic plan sub-goal 3, which is about using technology as a tool for learning, productivity, communication, and data solutions. Also peeking ahead, I see that our capital projects plan provides for some construction of the PE extension and also for some replacement of flooring at the high school. I would think that we could probably take this small piece of change and use it to advantage. I don't begin to know what's in our technology plan. I have not seen it, but I think that would make a very nice addition to whatever it is that Dr. Swenson's got in mind for technology. As an example, I don't know how many iPads you could buy with $2/3 but it's probably enough to give one to every teacher. No, that may be the worst possible use for technology, but my thought is that there should be something that we could use that money for fairly quickly that would move us down the path that we've already charted for ourselves in terms of the strategic plan, which is coming together very nicely. And I would support using that money strategically to support our educational objectives.
We certainly considered the option of expanding our expenditures, as you're suggesting, whether it be although I personally would not recommend that be in technology because of the very nature of technology and the relatively short life cycle. We generally are replacing our computers every 3 or 4 years, and so one of the things we are always very careful with our technology is that we always look ahead as to having an expenditure that we can sustain. And so if we take what I'd consider one-time money like this, and so say we were to buy iPads or whatever, then the question comes is, as we look to the future, how do we replace, once we put those in, how do we maintain them or replace them, as we know they'll have a relatively short life cycle. So if I were electing to increase our expenditures, I would have that concern as it relates to technology. Secondly, as we talk about our technology, I've certainly not been made aware that we feel that we have we can always have, we have almost an unlimited list of, kind of a wish list, if you will, whether it be in technology or in a lot of other areas, but it becomes a matter, but I don't believe that we are in a desperate type of situation with our technology or any of our other expenditures for that matter. We do have some things that come up that last year, for example, the assessed value came in lower, so we did not receive as much money in our capital fund as certainly as we would have otherwise. So my response is I don't think any of these options are wrong. I think it just becomes a matter of pick one. I would recommend doing the refinancing. What we do with the money, for me personally, would be secondary. As I considered the 3 options, and Jeff and I discussed it, we simply felt that all things considered, maybe the 3rd option is the one that we would choose and recommend. That's not to say that the other 2 are wrong, and I think either of the 3 options has some merit.
Good question. Roger, if we voted to simply do the refinancing, do we have to decide this evening on the...
Yeah, you probably should, just because we can't move forward without knowing which way to go, and it becomes a matter of, the reason I brought this to the workshop meeting is, since I don't know what will happen to interest rates, when you're dealing with something like this, you usually want to kind of lock in the rate and before it runs a chance of going up.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you. With that in mind, and of course, given that finance rates go up and down sometimes erratically, would it be unwise for us to perhaps give our administrators an opportunity to take a look at their technology plan to see if there's an opportunity that they would to come back to us with a recommendation of possible uses? I'm not able to sit here and articulate a well-formed idea of how that money should be spent.
Yeah, I think one of the dilemmas that I've certainly had as we've considered the 3 possible options is, as Roger shared, I don't know where I would recommend for the board in the future to replace is not the word, but come up with $750,000 again, because whatever we spend it on now, we would want to replace. But I mean, one wouldn't invest in this unless we would have it in perpetuum, if you please. And currently, we have not crafted the budget. Well, you're totally correct. Tonight, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about sub-goal number 3. I don't know that we're at the point to be able to say, aha, we ought to all buy. Your iPad example is a very decent example, simply because if I were to turn to you all and say that's what we ought to do, you properly would say was okay. At some point when you're going to replace these, where's that money going to come from? And as we sit here, we don't really, I wouldn't be able to answer that. It's not that I don't want to, or that I don't think it's a good idea. It's just, I think in the issue of frugality and clarity of expenditures is one that really the question is begged here because we just don't know. The state doesn't seem to have an interest in additional funding for technology. They're certainly not increasing our per pupil amount in the general fund. So it's a kind of a catch-22. So I think the issue here is can we replicate not the same purchase but the next latest greatest? Will we have the dollars to do it? As we sit here, I can't guarantee that we would, and so whatever benefit we might establish or achieve, I can't guarantee that we could continue it. Again, not due to lack of desire, just simply due to the fiscal wherewithal that we may, or in this case, may not have.
I think we all appreciate fiscal conservatism hereabouts. I mean, administrators have done a very good job in keeping us shipshape money-wise, but I'm just looking further down our own agenda tonight, and I'm seeing a wonderful case being made by you folks to use technology as a tool. And a part of the expected outcomes provide for basically spending money to make that happen.
Sure.
And here's an opportunity, a windfall, a one-time, non-recurring sort of a thing, and there are some kinds of technology which require repeated, recurring investments, and there are other kinds that don't. Our investment in Pinnacle, for example, was such a one-time investment. Do you have something like that up your sleeve? I don't know, but I would like to know what our choices are in a little bit more detail before we pull the trigger and commit ourselves to just simply taking that money and, reducing our final payment many, many years down the road.
Point well taken. Are there any more discussion with regards to this recommendation? Greg, do you have anything that you might want to add, or are you ready to vote? Pam?
Yeah, how are we going to vote? Are we voting on the three options? Are we offering each option up?
The recommendation on the table is that this money will be used, we'll be refinancing, and the money savings will be used for the last payment of the 2017 payment. That is the recommendation that is brought before us from the administration. Okay, seeing no comment. All in favor?
Wait a minute. Okay. I would like to move that we table this measure until our next regular business meeting, but for the reason that I believe this deserves just a little bit more thought on the part of the board. I think what we're going to discuss this evening has a lot to do with technology. I believe that we will have more thought. We'll see our way toward doing some things using this money that may not be, or we might well decide that it's exactly the way administrators have suggested. But I really hate to see an opportunity get by that could make a material difference. So I'm offering a motion to table until our next meeting.
Okay, there's a motion on the table to table this until the next meeting. Do we have a second from the board?
Second.
Okay. Discussion for this motion to table. I have a discussion question. My question for you, if this gets tabled, what is the financial impact? Do you foresee what do you foresee? What?
I mean, it's a matter of me trying to guess whether the interest rates will go up or not. As I said earlier, I requested that this be an exception to our normal business meeting and be put on this workshop meeting in an interest in moving forward with it soon. So it'd be anybody's guess as to whether tabling it would have a negative effect or not. It depends on whether the rates go up or not.
Okay, do we have to decide how the money is going to be spent to refinance? Does that have to be decided this evening, or can we move to refinance and?
Let me ask, our financial advisor, Colette Irwin-Knott with Umball & Associates, is in the audience. I'd ask her to attend. So at this point, I'm going to ask her to, if she'd go to the microphone and respond to your question.
Thank you. Good evening. If there is indeed board consensus that you want to move forward with the refinancing in order to realize a savings, the option can be determined within the next several days or week or so. What this would allow us to do is to begin drafting some of the financial documents and the legal documents that are necessary for the refinancing so that you won't lose time. In other words, as Roger has said, this is subject to interest rate fluctuation, and so at least that way we would know that you're interested in moving forward with the refinancing, and then can fine-tune the savings option in the near future.
Any other discussion, fellow board members?
So we could just do the refinancing tonight, vote on the refinancing, but not the option 1, 2, or 3. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
There's still, but it would be imperative that you make that decision in the near future, and I would define the near future as within the next week or two.
See, I would like to clarify here, if in fact there is no direction from the board in regard to 1, 2, and 3, as has just been pointed out, we have no board meeting. We have, in 2 weeks, we have a board meeting, but not within the time frame that's being specified here for the recommended option.
I thought she said that we could vote to refinance, but not vote on the option of the refinance.
It's just that they can't move forward. It probably, I'm guessing, take about a week, and at that point they would be ready to go. And so if they can have this locked in a week, if they have the authority. Otherwise, pretty much any time after the week, it's longer than it would be otherwise. Now, that may not result in any negative effect. There's just no way of knowing what the market is. But they'll be ready in about a week. I think what she's saying is, and so if your next meeting is 2 weeks, then it would be essentially delayed maybe perhaps a week from what it might have been. But if it's the next meeting, then I would encourage you to, if you feel a need to discuss or do whatever you would like to do to determine the option, then somewhere in the next week or two you'd need to.
Okay, I want to make sure I completely understand this. Our option number 1 is to use it for some other capital project improvement.
Well, I think Greg's being also not only
technology.
Well, yeah, which is different than some other capital improvement, because frankly, if I were picking that, that's not the option that I would pick, for example.
Okay.
Because of, for example, we're doing some things that were unanticipated in other areas of our capital expenditures, such as the demolition of old college wood, the acquisition of the old library, and I think anticipating some other possible. We put a roof on Cherry Tree out of earlier, and that delayed some other. So we've had a number of other capital expenses that have been shifted around and delayed, really, and because of the importance of our technology, that's one area of this capital fund that we've not reduced at all. And so I'd want to be, if the board's inclined to give specific direction as to how we would use this $600,000, then I think that would need to be determined too.
Okay. And then for option 2 and 3, both of those options, you'd be reinvesting the savings to reduce our payments by approximately $100,000 a year, or
right. Basically, the first option
but those are both reinvesting within the bond per se.
Right. Really, the first option, an additional expenditure, expands the amount of money that the board would otherwise spend, but has no negative impact it doesn't increase the tax rate to the taxpayers. The other two options both reduce what the taxpayers will otherwise be paying if we do nothing. So, which is why I'm in favor of the refunding regardless of what you do in terms of the options. But that would be my strongest recommendation, that we do refund these bonds. And so basically 2 of them expand our expenditures and do not have a negative effect on the taxpayer as compared to if we do nothing. And the other 2 options, lower the amount that the community will pay by one way or another by $600 and some thousand, no matter whether it's lowered a little bit for the next 5 or 6 years or the entire amount comes off at the end.
Thank you. Okay.
Just one other comment, please.
Yes.
Looking through my email this week, I noticed another message from Doug Polari. Doug's always sent along these wonderful photo essays of the marching band and how well the kids are doing and so forth. And there was one shot in there that it showed a whole row of these beautiful horns. And I thought to mention that because that brought to mind that at one time this board had invested about $1 million in instruments for the marching band and orchestra, which is a one-time kind of a thing that I think has had continuing benefit for kids down through the years. I think this board has an opportunity, consistent with what we're talking about doing in terms of our strategic plan here, which calls for allocating resources to provide technology tools necessary to support student learning, productivity, communications, and so forth. So
Okay.
I think my motion's still on the table.
Your motion is on the table, but I've not had an opportunity to discuss it.
I'd like to call the question.
Go ahead, please.
He's done. He's okay.
Okay. Motion on the table is to table this recommendation until the following meeting. All in favor of tabling this until the following meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion declined 4-1. So motion on the table is still to go with the recommendation of refinancing the bonds and applying the final payment and applying the captured savings to the final payment of 2017. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion rides 3-2. Thank you. Next, we have a report by Mr. McMichael.
Okay, then. Nope. I got so much help, I wouldn't know what to do if I had any more. What?
Because you're displaying Jeff.
Oh.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Okay, I want to first point out that what you see there moving and everything is my attempt to keep up with Jeff and Amy on technology, or at least to have my assistant keep up with Jeff and Amy on technology, and to show me where the button's at. So.
Any use of technology is appreciated.
That's right. And it'd probably take all that $600,000 to get me advanced to where they're at, but that's just another separate story. But okay, our 2013 budget. Let me begin by, mostly for benefit of the general public, to note that our Carmel budget is made up of 7 funds. Our general fund, which is oftentimes when we're talking about the school budget, that's really the budget that a lot of people are talking about. But the fact is we have 7 different funds and 7 different budgets. But certainly the general fund is the major operating budget. Our second fund is our referendum fund, a fund that many school districts do not have. We have the very good fortune, as the board's aware, of having a referendum fund and having that voted on and supported by the community. And that really is operationally becomes an expansion of the general fund. As a matter of fact, this evening I will be, I've combined those two funds for purposes of this PowerPoint because we really operate now with a combined, those funds being combined in terms of our general operating funds that are available. Because anything that we use general fund for, we can also essentially use referendum funds for, and we, in fact, we do that. Our third fund is our transportation fund, which is for the operational aspect of transportation. Then we have a bus replacement fund, which, as the name implies, is specifically to replace buses. We then have a debt service fund, which is used to repay debt, and then a pension fund, which will soon be expiring, but this board sold pension bonds in 2003 to fund a new retirement program when at that time the state determined that common practice in schools to use accumulated sick days as a buyout, if you will, unused days upon retirement was considered an unfunded liability, and so they told school districts you really had to change that program. And so Carmel, like many districts, sold bonds to transition over to a different type of program. And then finally, our last fund is our capital projects fund, used not only for construction, repair of buildings, and purchase and maintenance of equipment. In our case, a significant portion of that fund is used for our technology expenses. I'll start with the general fund. In recent years, the general fund is now funded by the state, as the board's aware. No longer does it rely on part of its funding from property taxes. We receive the funding through a rather complicated state formula that's referred to as the basic grant. As the board could imagine, the number of students and any growth in students has significant impact to the outcome of that funding formula. And so we are, or I have assumed for purposes of our budget, additional growth of 85 students. This is a number that's directly off of our most recent demographic study. Each year we will have, we certainly project this number as we go along, but this is the one identifiable number, right or wrong, that's out there. And so unless, and we just recently had that study updated, so as time goes on, if we find that it's not tracking pretty closely, then I'll certainly reconsider whether we use this for purposes of our budget. But at the moment, that's what I'm using. So our revenue again is coming from the basic grants based on additional growth of 85 students. With regard to our expenditures, in terms of the major categories under salaries, as I've said in previous updates to our financial projections, I've built this budget to reflect an increase in salaries that's equal to the previous incremental schedules, which is not to say that as you know, the laws have changed, and so we do not believe that we can continue with the type of salary schedules that we've had in the past, at least for teaching staff. But I did leave the funding in there that equated to that amount, and I did that with any previous financial projections that I've presented to the board, and I'm continuing along the same line. So you'll see in the end, because it's only been a couple of weeks since we did the last financial report, that the conclusion of the budget has not significantly changed, or maybe there was a few little changes, but not of any real significance. In the area of benefits, we now know for this 2012-2013 school year that our health insurance and dental insurance will increase 10%. It's really health insurance. The dental is not going up, but the health is going up 10%. And I've continued to project an increase of 10% for 13-14 because we're really building a budget across 2 school years because our budgeting is on a calendar year. That puts us in a position of using essentially 2/3 of one school year and 1/3 of another. And with regard to health insurance, our renewal is in October, so it kind of tracks with a school year basis. So we're in any calendar year we will have we're looking at the impact of 2 renewals. With regard to the non-personnel expenses then, such as property insurance and utilities and so forth, those are based on current trends, several of which I've, again, previously shared with the board in terms of specific detail. And then things what we would consider controllable, such as supplies and travel, we've made no change from 2012. Next information then is our estimate of revenue. This is a format of a state-prescribed form. Sometimes you hear people talking about our budget's really an 18-month budget, and that's because while about 2012, of course, has been approved by the state, as we now move toward the 2013 budget approval, the state does go back and look at our revenue, take another look at our revenue for the last 6 months of 2012, because things like excise tax, for example, by the time they get to approving our 13 budget, they'll either know what the excise tax, final excise tax for 2012 is, or they'll certainly have a much better idea than they did a year prior when they approved our budget. So some of the last 6 months of 2012 will change as we go through the 13 approval process. And you can see here then that as you look at here I have now combined the referendum fund with the general fund, and therefore there is a property tax for the referendum fund. There is no property tax levy for the general fund anymore, but there is for the referendum fund, and you can see it's just right at $13 million projected for 2013. And then let's see if we can get down here. Yeah, you'll see here then that the basic grant, out of a total of $99.6 million, $80 million of that is from the basic grant, and you also have $2.4 million for the new full-day kindergarten grant. As a part of this revenue. So the vast majority of this revenue is coming from the state basic grant. However, a significant portion, in our case, just over $13 million, is coming from our locally approved referendum. Yes.
Back to the kindergarten grant.
Yes.
Can you explain when we get that kindergarten grant and how that works?
Yeah. Yes. The grant. Our basic grant, the $80 million comes in, we get an amount each month, so it's evenly spread over the year. The kindergarten money, however, will come in as essentially a lump sum payment that will be in late fall, probably about November or December, even December, but sometime prior to January 1st. So essentially when we start, we will not have the money from the state to fund full-day kindergarten, but then by December we'll have all the money to fund for the entire year. So first we'll be short from the state because obviously school's starting in August. We won't receive this grant until December, but when we do receive it in December, it will be in for the entire school year. So at that point we will have all the money to also pay the cost, or the majority of the cost certainly, for the balance of the school year through June. And so that's how that portion of the money flows into our operating funds. Now, with regard to our appropriations, then you can see from this overhead that a little over 72% of our expenditures for our operating funds are for salaries, and then almost 22% is for benefits. So about 94% of these budgets, that is our general fund, our referendum fund, are spent on personnel. And the balance then is spent on purchase services, which is things like utilities. And you'll see this is not our utility budget. We pay another $2.5 million from our capital fund, which was started being allowed a few years ago, but that amount now is frozen in the capital fund, and so any increases we incur in utilities, all the increase falls to the general fund. That's why, for example, you see the light and power going from $408,000 to $792,000. That's because the entire budget's about $3 million. And so with a 7 or 8% increase, or perhaps 10 in the second year, that's almost doubling our amount in the general fund. It doesn't mean that the cost is doubling, just all the increases is going to the general fund. And you can see then we have a couple percent going to supplies, and then just very small amounts going to fixed assets and other expenditures such as bonds and dues and fees and so forth. So with regard to these two funds then, and I've included now the jobs fund, the board's aware that in 2013 we will, or 2012 actually, we will use about $2.6 million of federal monies, part of the stimulus package, and we will of course use that to offset costs in our general fund and referendum fund. So these numbers now not only include general fund and referendum fund, but it includes that one-time infusion of federal monies referred to as the jobs fund. And so January 1st of this year we had $7.8 million of beginning operating balance. Our 2012 revenues are projected at $104.6 million, and for a total of $112.5 million, assuming our 2012 expenditures and encumbrances. Encumbrances is just obligations, so we've either expended the money or we've essentially committed. And usually the example I give, if we have a purchase order written out there, it'd be like if you wrote a check and it hadn't cleared the bank yet. You have the obligation for it, you just haven't actually made the expenditure. So that's what the encumbrance term means, and it will result in an increase of our operating balance up to just over $13 million, which is consistent with what the board has seen in previous financial updates. And I've noted here that the job funds is a one-time stimulus fund, or monies. Then in 2013, again with a beginning balance of $13 million, projected revenues of $99.6 million, you'll see that we're projecting the cash balance by the end of 13 to drop slightly to just under $12.5 million. When we're building budgets, now the revenue's very predictable in the sense, I mean, it's the basic grant, unless there is a state shortfall, which we have experienced. It's much more predictable than it has been in years past when part of the funding was supported with property tax. Because with the property tax, in the end, you're dependent upon what's actually collected and what you actually receive, which isn't always 100%. Now with the basic grant, absent a state shortfall, it's very predictable as to how much the state's going to send. And so the revenue is increasingly predictable. And the expenses are somewhat predictable too, because in these budgets, with staff under contract and so forth, we know what we pay people, and it's there's some change. I mean, you've got extracurricular stipends and so forth, but it's reasonably predictable. But generally, if I'm going to err on the conservative side in terms of the budgeting, because I don't want to tell you that we're going to spend one amount and then spend a lot more than that. So I would hope, if anything, that our expenditures could be a little less as compared to a little more. Our insurance, for example, I've consistently assumed 10% increase. I do that because it's still less than the national trend, but we've tended to run lower than the trend, and I suspect if I looked over the past 3 years, it's probably closer to about 7% than 10. Last year it was 0, but now this year it is 10. So there are things like that that fluctuate, and so when you're dealing with an operation of this size, it's sometimes these numbers look very specific, but in fact it's not an exact science as we go through this. So that is our general fund and referendum fund. I'll move on then to transportation fund. With transportation, our revenues are coming from property tax. The rest of these funds are 100% locally funded. No more state money in the rest of the budgeting presentations. They're primarily funded from property tax. However, each fund does receive its share of excise and financial institution tax. In some cases, there's some otherwise miscellaneous revenue, but primarily these funds are, the money for these funds is coming from a property tax levy. In transportation, our salaries are projected to increase about 3%. We don't know, I certainly don't know what increases, if any, that the board may grant to this group of our employees. We're pretty stable now, with our enrollment not growing like it once did. We're not adding routes to the extent that, so we're fairly stable in terms of personnel. And then other increases are just based on trends. We're in good financial shape in our transportation fund. We began this year with an operating balance of just over $1 million on a budget of $8.3 million or $8.5 million, and anticipate ending this year maybe a little bit down, but not drastically down from where we started. And then you can see as we go through this in 2013, we don't see a lot of change in terms of our fiscal position in our transportation fund. The transportation budget and fund is controlled by a tax rate. So essentially the state tells us the maximum amount of money that you can raise and the maximum you can increase that tax rate. It's really based on, they're using assessment of growth in the community and growth in assessed value. So they do take into account, I mean, if you're a rapidly growing school district, the formula essentially recognizes that and does make some provision. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but it at least attempts to recognize if you're in a growing community. In our case, again, we're in good shape in our transportation fund. As you know from reading the papers, that's not the case in many school districts around the state. The next fund is our bus replacement fund. Again, the revenue is based on the latest estimates in terms of assessed values and so forth as far as property taxes, and then we are planning on replacing 13 buses, which is, we have a 12-year bus replacement plan as required by statute, which is a part of your documents, and so this is just part of that cycle that we submit to the state every year, and it is based on a 12-year replacement cycle. So you can see this fund does not maintain any kind of significant cash balance. We had a minimal balance when we started. We're projecting some increase by the end of this year, but it's relatively speaking, it's a very small fund. Our next fund is our debt service and pension funds. Again, the revenue is based on the latest information that we have. We actually have 5 bond issues, and then I'll address the loan issue in a second. But we have 5 bond issues, and then we have this year. You recall that there was really a court case that said that we were under approved this year in our debt funds, and so we were permitted to take a no interest loan essentially from the state, and the provision that it would then be repaid in 2012, and so we took that loan. So we're of course anticipating paying it back out of 2013. So here began with a cash balance of $7.3 million. We have, you'll see the expenditures are $27 million, the revenue's $21. That's because you recall we moved $4.5 million from debt service operating balance to the rainy day fund to offset some losses that we had in our capital funding, and thus, and you'll see in that reverses itself a bit in next year, because we are in the debt service fund. We're permitted to carry a 6-month operating balance. We've generally carried most of that, and a couple of times that's been very beneficial to us. The first time was when we had the $3.8 million shortfall from the state, and because of we had that operating balance, we were able to use that to offset the deficit, and then later the referendum fortunately was approved, and which otherwise would have had a major fiscal impact to the district and its operations. So this is then our debt service and pension fund, and then the next fund is our capital projects fund. So by way of background information, point out again for benefit of the public that we have 11 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, the high school, 2 transportation facilities, and this building. We have a total square footage of a little over 2.8 million square feet and about 682 acres of property that we maintain, with insured values of $419 million. In accordance with the statute, the board, in this case, must not only adopt a budget, but also adopt a 3-year capital projects fund plan. The first year, I always tell the board that the first year, whatever's approved, we're going to tax the community for that amount of money to support that plan. And again, it's limited by a maximum tax rate. You can't just tax anything you want. But in fact, our current tax rate's just a little over 21 cents, which has potential to raise a little over $14 million. Now that's from the levy. You'll see in a minute that the plan's bigger than that because it also gets its share of excise tax and other miscellaneous taxes. So there's a requirement of a 3-year plan. Year 1 will ultimately result in the establishment of a tax rate, and we will then generate, from that much money. Year 2 and 3, while it's part of the plan, as with any plan, the farther out you go, the more likely that something will change in that plan, and which is fine because it's just what it says. It's a plan and gives you some idea where we're headed. But it's not until you get to the current year that you're now actually going to raise the money, presumably, and that sometimes changes too, but presumably to do whatever the projects are in the plan. And there are provisions to change that, and occasionally we do find it necessary to change. I'd use that roof at Cherry Tree, for example. We didn't plan on doing it that year, but because of the circumstances, we decided to move it up on the schedule, so we changed the plan and replaced a roof in lieu of doing something at the high school. And so, as I've noted here, then the tax rate and the levy are only approved for the first year. Again, the revenue, this fund, the revenue for this fund comes primarily from property taxes, but also from excise tax and financial institution tax. The projected revenues are about $15.5 million in 2013, about 16.2 in 14, a little bit more than that in 15. The assumption from 14 to 15 is that we may grow a little bit in assessed value, and that will then, for the same tax rate, will raise a little bit more money. The reason 13 is less, by $1 million than 14 is because of our need to neutralize, and the board's heard that term before, we have to neutralize our pension bond, or at least a part of it. And so there was new statute this year, which, and this will be, 13 will be the last year for that pension bond, but we will need to offset the levy amount for that bond by 25%. 25% of that bond, the payment for that bond, is about $1 million. And so that will come from our capital fund. That will be paid off in 13, and therefore in 14, the entire levy will be available for the capital fund. So that's the why you're seeing 13 less than 14 or 15. Again, here we began with a cash balance of $3.9 million. That should not be looked at as excess money. That just means that, given the nature of this fund, that to the extent we have construction projects or things that wouldn't necessarily be finished timely with the end of the year, there's simply still cash out there. That doesn't mean that cash is committed. In fact, it's just not been spent yet. Which is why, as you go down through this, then again, we're showing a 2012 total expenditures of $16.4 million, and a small cash balance in January 1st, and then we purposely really, drive this to a zero cash balance, because rather than trying to speculate on how the cash will actually flow for the projects, we know eventually it's going to get spent. It's just a matter of where it'll be at the end of the year. So I think it's more understandable just to assume that it's all committed one way or the other. Now, in this fund, I'm going to highlight what I refer to as the major projects of each year. For example, in 2013, we've got $3.5 million scheduled for the fitness center, the PE addition at Carmel High School. That project's underway now, but will be finished next in 2013, and thus the additional funding to finish that project. This is $3.5 million out of about $16 million. So the balance of it is spread all over, and you've got the detail of that in your report. But for example, you'll hear later that the area of technology, for example, we spend $4.6 million recurringly in our capital fund. $2.5 million is spent for utilities. So those are a couple of other major categories of expenses, but the other items collectively are somewhat recurring. As the technology, for example, the amount is roughly recurring each year. So I'm not highlighting that specifically, whereas what I am highlighting are more or less, I again consider they're not recurring projects. This was where we're spending a larger amount of money this year, as the example of the PE addition. In 2014, showing $2.5 million at Carmel High School for flooring and finishes. We started, keep in mind that facility is almost 1 million square feet, and so we have commenced replacing flooring and doing painting and so forth in portions of that building. We started this a couple of years ago. This was the area where we took almost $1.5 million and redirected it to replace that roof at the elementary school. And so you'll see this coming up. There's a lot of floors and a lot of a lot of finishes in a building that size. And then in 2015, the third year of the plan, we're showing $1 million for the same purpose at Town Meadow. That building was built in 2000, and so by 15, it will be that carpet will be 15 years old. It's actually a little bit later than in some cases our replacement cycle, but we certainly can manage until 2015 to do replacing of finishes in that building. And then at the moment, I'm showing $2 million for the sports building and / turf. This is the area where the soccer stadium is at, and you've seen this before. It's been pushed out a couple of times, and we've been talking about doing this project a little bit like that fitness center for a few years now, and something comes up and pushes it out. But those of you that have toured the facility that's there, it needs something, and hopefully we'll get to it perhaps in 2015. And I think that's it. Let me see now, just a second here. Okay, I want to get rid of this and go to my next one.
Could we ask some questions while you are?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question. Do others have a question they might want to ask at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay.
Thank you, Madam President. Roger, first of all, thanks for the usual excellent overview. It's always helpful to go back to budgeting 101 with you. I'd like to return to our discussion about technology and instruction-related technology. I'm looking at the last page of the draft budget that you passed out to the board, and I'm possibly not understanding what I'm looking at, so maybe you could help me here. The line item that looks at technology, instruction-related technology, it doesn't show any money.
Are you looking in the general fund, Greg?
I'm looking at the very last page of the draft budget,
Capital projects.
which is got titled the Capital Project Fund Summary. Now, maybe my page is out of order here, but it's the CPF plan summary, very last page.
Okay, I'm with you now.
Are you with me?
Yes.
I mean, this is not really saying that we're not intending to spend any on instructional technology, I hope.
No, it's not. It's just the coding. First, you're seeing underneath that is being referred to as administrative technology. That I think is a bit misleading. It's I suspect based where the numbers at, that's just where we're budgeting all of it. And so the name of it is misleading because it's really we're budgeting as it shows here about $2.8 million, but that's only part of it of what we spend up under equipment. And under maintenance of equipment, you'll see numbers like 1.3 million, and under purchase of equipment, $2 million. Within there, depending on the category of expenditures, for example, the technology maintenance staff is categorized under a different account than equipment, and repair of equipment's under yet a different category. So we're spending about $4.6 million, and it's spread amongst these various accounts, some of which are not obvious they're not specifying as being it may just say equipment purchases, for example, but the vast majority of that equipment is in fact technology. So it's hard to get. You could not get to the $4.6 million by seeing the summary page. Or even the details by school because of the way the accounting is set up.
Well, something that we've talked about on this board in the recent past is I think we all have the desire to see alignment between this document and the strategic plan.
Yep, and I've got some, in fact, maybe if I could go to the second PowerPoint. It starts to address that, and which is why I have it here, is really in response to some comments that you made earlier, where we talked about trying to identify how our budgeting reflects our support of our goals. So if I might, let me go through that. Maybe that'll answer some of your questions, or at least be a basis for that discussion.
I do, except I have a question that's related just to budgeting.
This part, okay.
I'd received my assessment for my property value, which decreased far more than I had expected. So when will we realize the impact of the decreased assessed value on our funds?
Well, number one, I'm hoping that while many of our residential properties went down, that hopefully that'll be offset by some either going up or some additional properties as you see new construction and so forth. So there's no question that I too, saw mine go down, which from a taxpayer standpoint I liked, but from a school administrator standpoint, not so sure, because the last 2 years our overall assessments in the community has dropped about 2.5%, as I recall, over the 2 years. Well, when you apply 2.5% to the size of budgets we talk about, it starts to add up, and so to answer your question, once the final assessment is certified, then we'll know, and certainly when our budgets are approved, we will know what the final what it's based on, what the final assessment is. Now there's always appeals, and so the next year it can change based on appeals, but essentially to answer your question, when they approve our budget, we'll know the assessment. I will tell you that in preparation for the budget, the auditors sent out information as they're required to do and give an estimate, and they suggested we use an assessment 2% less than what it currently is. I wasn't overly distressed by that simply because, again, they don't want us using higher than what it's going to be because that reflects how much you make an assumption on how much money you're going to get. So I certainly have been hopeful that the impact of the recession would be pretty much, be leveling out in this community, and that I'm certainly hopeful that our assessment will not drop a third year in a row. But the fact is, I don't know, and I don't know anybody else that knows at the moment. It is a fact that while properties are being have been reassessed, and many have actually been reduced, it's also a fact that you can tell just as you drive around, there is some construction going on and still some growth in Carmel, and again, more so than in many communities. So the question will be is whether or not that assessment that's added to the tax rolls will offset or any existing other decreases, and the answer is I don't know, but hopefully that'll be the case, because it impacts, the assessed value impacts all of our funds except really even our general fund now as it relates to the referendum, because the referendum is driven by a 16-cent tax rate. So the assessment drops, the money drops, and the same is true of the other funds. The exception would be debt service. We are permitted to raise enough money to pay our debt, regardless of the assessed value. However, the circuit breaker concept comes into play even there, and again, we're fortunate because we have a very low tax rate, one of the lowest in the state actually. And so we have been minimally impacted by the circuit breaker, unlike some of our neighbors, unfortunately, who've lost literally millions of dollars. By the way, last year the loss due to the circuit breaker was $22 million in this county. As taxpayers, we all like the lower tax rate, and it certainly sells pretty well politically. But the fact is collectively, if units of government knew how to deliver the same services for $22 million less, I suspect we'd be doing it. So I think we usually manage somehow, but it's enough that it will make a difference eventually.
Thank you.
Okay. Now with regard to district goals and the budget, I did talking with Amy, I have highlighted a couple of things. I asked her, well, where in the budget would you cite some of our expenditures that specifically relate to our goals? And the first thing I would emphasize, and that we would emphasize, is that in our operational budgets, certainly all of our teachers, all the money that we're spending for staff, we believe that all of us really are focused on these goals, and while we each have different roles, even the business office feels a sense of obligation toward recognizing the goals, and as we make decisions, we are focused on how those decisions do impact these goals, and so I'm not going to pull up here the amount of funds that are spent in teacher salaries, for example, or other certified salaries. It's not to say that those aren't emphasizing, but we do have two or three that we think would be specifically related to supporting these goals. So that the first goal, for example, provides students with differentiated learning opportunities in order to be responsive to student needs. I would cite the instructional assistants we have. We have approximately 265 instructional assistants. We spend about $4.4 million on instructional assistants. And so this is an area that they're very specifically targeting everything from remediation to a whole variety of things that our fine instructional assistants do. So that would be one. The second is technology, and you'll see this repeated because we do use technology as a tool, and so it really supports all the goals. And here you can see, as I've alluded to, that we spend about $4.6 million on technology. This is the recurring amount. Now, when we were doing major construction, we spent millions of dollars as a part of the construction project to put in infrastructure. As I recall, the one major bond issue when we did the middle schools and the freshman center, I believe we spent well over about $10 or $12 million just from bond funds in addition to this amount. So if you were to look at what we've averaged over the last 10 years, it would be significantly more than this because certain areas of technology coincide with other improvements to the facility. So this is the amount that we're spending at the moment, year in and year out, to support that effort. And then the third area is the curriculum and instruction. Now, by curriculum instruction, and it's really curriculum instruction and assessment, but I couldn't get all the words on there so you could read them. But that's Amy's area here at the ESC. It's about $900,000. Frankly, this is an area that we don't often, want to highlight, perhaps, and some people are even, somewhat, they seem to be ashamed of this area. You hear a lot from the state level about, instruction in the classroom and so forth. The fact is that Carmel Schools is very proud of what we do in our curriculum department. This includes our instructional specialist, for example. That's a relatively new position that we have. And these are teachers that have come out of the classroom and are focus on a certain specialty and then go back out in the schools to work with other teachers. So we're very proud of this expense. We think it's a very integral part of what we do, and we don't think that we could be nearly as focused on any of our goals if it were not for this area. I at least think it's really at the heart of what we do. Although I think the business office is really important, but but I would have to say that they do a lot of good things. So I would want to highlight that area. Our second goal is to fully engage students in learning. There again, we have 37 counselors that are very actively involved in working with students in terms of their schedules and so forth, and we spend just under $3 million for that area of expenditure. And again, we also the same technology budget is supporting that goal, and you'll see it supports all the goals. Then the third goal, using technology as a tool for learning and productivity. Again, we would identify the curriculum and instruction who's really providing direction and support for all of our professional staff as they seek to support this overall goal. And then again, the technology area, and I threw this in again to just try to keep up with my co-workers. So there you go. Now, and I'd respond to any questions you might have with regard to that.
Great.
Thank you, Madam President.
It's good.
We mentioned technology a lot this evening.
We have.
But I don't know that I've yet had a look at the technology plan. I believe that we're required to have such a thing. Mm-hmm. Would it be possible to have a copy of that we could study?
Yes, is the answer. We've had some recent conversations about technology, and as we talk about things like the refunding and technology and budgets for technology, we think it very well may be an appropriate topic to provide as a workshop where you can have 2 or 3 hours to hear some information, more specifics from Christy Cloud and her group, and also allow for the the dialogue back and forth.
I think it's an excellent idea. I'd request that perhaps in advance of the workshop we could have access to that document. I always feel like I ask better questions if I have a chance to prepare.
Yep.
Other questions? Just one.
When you said we had 37 counselors, is that counselors and MSWs? That's not just labeled as counselors?
It's probably both.
I think that's inclusive.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Do we have other questions?
I just have a question. It's more actually probably for you, Layla or Jeff. What's our timetable as far as, I know this is the presentation, the first presentation of the budget. What's our timetable on that?
Yeah, at the next meeting, 27th, I believe, we will have another opportunity for any other questions or any other discussion that the board would like to have. And then at the end of that, I will ask for the board's authority to advertise for a hearing as required by statute. We must hold a public hearing with regard to the budget, and so we will do that in September, I believe. And then after the hearing, then later yet, the board, but prior to November the 1st, I believe, the board will has to adopt budgets. If you're going to have a budget, you have to do so before November the 1st. And so it's really a rather long process and giving ample opportunity for both the board and the public to consider the budget, and they have an opportunity, the public certainly has an opportunity for any input they would like to make, and for the board to consider. And so the board's not asked to finally act on these budgets for a couple of months.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Do we have other questions with regards to the budget and what Roger McMichael had presented this evening? Okay. Well, next on our plan should be the strategic plan. I am going to make a suggestion, and you can motion or go with the recommendation. We have the strategic plan as sub-goal 3. Our director of technology is not able to be with us this evening. And if it is all right with others amongst us, if we postpone this until our following meeting. I know Andy needs to be going, and we have some other obligations this evening as well.
I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. So we're going to, do I need a motion to table that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay. Second. All in favor?
Several seconds.
Okay. Next, superintendent's goals and evaluations.
Thank you, Madam President. Very quickly, I'm going to switch seats because we had originally thought we'd be at the front tables, but I want everyone to just keep your seat because this is going to be 5 minutes in a cloud of dust because we do have an executive session coming up. And this was intended, I would note for one and all, simply to be an introductory presentation. This was not meant to be in any great depth. So we'll be just walking through, if you please, the pieces of my goals for the coming year, and then we'll have ample opportunity for full discussion and connection and so on and so forth as the next couple of meetings would permit.
And while you are doing that, I just wanted to share with our fellow board members that I know our discussion all along is that we wanted to be sure that we align our goals, the superintendent's goals, with the strategic plan. So this is certainly not set in stone. These are going to be fluid at this point in time. We have a retreat coming up on the 25th that we will be discussing these as well, and then we'll move forward and have some larger discussions at our upcoming meetings. And with that, as soon as you're ready, Dr. Swenson, you may begin.
There we go. Creatures inside the machine are working hard, for sure. Which little button is that? Oh, I'm the only one. In the interlude, I would encourage anyone, both in the audience and behind the board, to sing their high school fight song. It worked for me. I think it's no thanks to you.
You have to put that under training. Sorry. Thank you so much.
Again, very briefly.
Need a mic.
Sorry.
This kind of threw us off, sorry. We're still climbing.
Yes, we are. Awesome. Very briefly, again. Terrific. It works. Real quickly, I've structured these goals to indicate that there really is a work in progress. There are 7 goals specifically. We'll start, as I'm simply labeling them as practical matters. Goal number 6 really continues where we've been previously in the sense of providing a safe learning environment. As you can see, there are 3 big ticket items as part of that. I'm pleased to say that we have begun installation of our doorbell access entryways at our buildings, and we'll continue to work on that through this school year and into next. Then we also have what I would call some CCS basics, goals 5 and 4. Certainly my goal is to exceed expectations, incorporating our strategic plan, engaging DALT and the board and community and stakeholders, ensuring that our standards as identified here and elsewhere are our focus, and to sustain our efforts as a district to meet and to exceed existing state and national standards. My 4th goal is to strengthen instruction and in collaboration with certainly the CIA, the business department, colleagues throughout the district, RISE and collaboration with the CIA will be a key part of what I do. Both in terms of literacy achievement and general standards as well, and also to increase our ISTEP plus math scores by 1% per grade level as we close out the current school year. In terms of teamwork, goal number 3, the high-performing school district legislation and thinking and activities moving forward. All of that collaboration really is aiming towards the long session of the legislature coming up, and the goal is by July the 1st of 2013 that we will have legislation that promulgates high-performing school district status. The second goal is an accountability goal, and that's I will take responsibility to implement Carmel Rise with all school leaders and with my cabinet, as well as to assess our corporations and the schools, general schools alignment with high standards. And then finally, I believe the summit is really adherence to our standard of performance. That is a combination, really a comprehensive linkage between our strategic plan and engagement of all of our staff in the various elements of the strategic plan, which, as we've spoken about this evening, really do, or they really are rather, coming into a coherent package at this time. So I apologize for that swift, uncharacteristically swift, I might add, presentation. So I'd be happy to answer any quick questions with the understanding that we'll do this certainly at greater length and depth. But I know that you all have a paper copy of these, which are spelled out in greater depth.
Do you have any questions?
I have a question. I like your summary here, though. Is there any way we can get a copy of this?
That's a great question. I will turn to
technology.
Well, yeah. Well, I honestly don't know how to copy a Prezi. So let me see what we can do. I will consult with the technological wizards and see what they have to say.
Oh, that'd be great. And I'm not talking it in a rushed way.
Yeah.
Like
sure.
Layla said, we're discussing at the retreat.
Right.
And that's kind of nice. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Just one comment, Dr. Swenson. I think this represents a very high level of performance. a very high target for you professionally, and I think we'll all be very pleased to see you accomplish that.
That's my goal. I'm sorry, those are my goals.
And thank you very much. I just
Yes,
want to throw out real quick, we had discussed as a board and, or individually, we discussed amongst ourselves, the strategic plan, somehow thinking along the lines of quarterly reports, or the way we've now transitioned with our budget, having quarterly reports, that has been extremely helpful. And for us to continue to stay on target, now that we have our strategic plan that we are working towards, some mode of accountability for all of us would be great.
Readily done. As soon as we
move forward.
Finally approve that, why, you bet. I think that's a good idea.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. With that, I'd like to thank everybody who joined us this evening. We appreciate your support, and we will adjourn. Oh, do I have a motion to adjourn our meeting?
So moved.
Fabulous. Adjourned.
Everybody can see it?